Hi everyone, here on the Current Temp we like to update you and educate you on topics like weather and finance. And today's topic actually crosses my path quite often, and we're going to dive into it. You've seen them streaking across the sky, long white trails that linger behind airplanes and dazzle us. Now for some they're just harmless contrails, but for others they are evidence of a global cover-up. But are these mysterious chemtrails really secret chemicals that are being sprayed from above, or are they just science misunderstood? Today we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most enduring sky-high conspiracies and separating fact from fiction. All right, friends, I am Joey Sulipeck, and welcome to this week's episode of the Current Temp. And I am, again, so very proud to be sponsored by and partnering with the fine people at Lexus of Memphis. A just unbelievable gold standard company and product, and thank you, Lexus, for being a part of this. Today, we're diving into what's known as the chemtrail conspiracy. Maybe you've heard that phrase before, and we've all looked up into that bright blue sky and seen those signature lines crisscrossing above us, and we just talked about how dazzling that can be, but sometimes it can be a little confusing. Now, there are times when you can actually see the plane that's causing it go slowly across the sky, or more often you see the after effect, those lines moving in all different directions. So what are these things? Well, over the years, I've heard so many of you refer to these generically as chemtrails, and social media usually blows up with it. I will tell you that it has made meteorologists across the nation crazy hearing this and hearing what people say about it. And some say it's innocently, some say the word chemtrails innocently, while others believe it's part of this broad, complicated, organized, nefarious scheme, and that is called the chemtrail conspiracy. So what are they really? All right. What you're looking at when you look into the sky is actually called a contrail. Now that stands for condensation trail or contrail. These are linear clouds made up of ice crystals that form behind aircraft at high altitudes. You can see the photo right here. So here's what happens. When a jet engine is running at that high altitude, you've got a couple of different chemical things occurring at once. You've got both heat and humidity being combined. And as the jet engine passes by that hot and humid air, it interacts with the very cold air in the upper atmosphere, and that process causes the water vapor in the air to condense and freeze, forming those ribbons that we see. That's actually floating ice that can resemble like cirrus clouds. And keep in mind, a cloud is basically just floating water. So here's what happens. If the surrounding air around the jet engine is relatively dry, well, the contrails evaporate quickly. In fact, you have probably seen a plane going by with no contrail, which means the air is extremely dry, or a very short contrail that dissipates quickly. That's because the air is dry. If the air up there is relatively humid, well, the opposite occurs, and the contrails can linger. And then if the winds are low, they'll stay for a long time, or if the winds pick up, they can get spread out and sort of smeared across the sky. So what in the world is a chemtrail, and where did that start? Well, this is where I need to point out that people have been trying to modify or influence weather for centuries. Now, of course, we've all heard the term rain dance, so let's go way back into ancient times. Cultures everywhere engaged in efforts and rituals that they hoped would influence or promote weather. Now, here's one that I found fascinating. In the late 19th century, there was a gentleman named Louis Gathman who suggested that science could come into play. Okay, now we're going from ritualistic sort of trying to dance and make offerings to the rain. Now we're getting science involved in its early stages. And his ideas were like this: to put liquid carbon dioxide into clouds to try to promote rain. Here's another theory, and this is what this sort of graphic is about. Others experimented with sound. The thinking at the time was that loud noises like a cannon being fired off would stimulate the rainfall, that the sound itself would stimulate rainfall and make crops begin to appear. But maybe the most popular is seeding, and that's what this photo is. This is when we really began to see scientifically controlled experiments in weather modification around 1948. There was a gentleman named Irvin Langmuir and his colleagues at General Electric. He worked at GE, experimented with seeding clouds using dry ice, right, to produce rain. And that's the photo you're seeing now, are these little canisters on the back of a wing where they would release dry ice or other sort of chemicals that were supposed to stimulate rainfall. And later that process evolved into something where they were injecting silver iodide into clouds to alter the weather. I think this is a good place to point out and remind you, there's still a lot of mystery about weather, about clouds, about how lightning forms, or even breaking down the specifics of tornadoes, hail. A lot of question marks. We are constantly making advances, but there's still things we don't know that are mysterious. And so that's sort of the process through time as people are trying to impact weather or make it do what they want it to do. And we're going to get more into that in a moment. My point is this. This has never been a secret. It's not anything new. Cultures and societies have tried to influence weather for generations. And one of the primary goals to impact crops. We have to feed our societies, our cultures, our families. And so in many times, if you had a drought, they would try to stimulate rainfall or turn very dry, arid regions that could not promote or sustain life or crops or agriculture. They were trying to get water into those areas that had a water deficit. So back to our question, how in the world did we gain this fascination with the word chemtrails? Well, let me point you to this magazine cover because this really took off in about 1996. It was the mid-1990s, and this conspiracy theory really exploded because of this. In 1996, the U.S. Air Force, no less, published a paper entitled Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. Keep in mind, this came out in 1996, so this paper, and this is the cover of that article, was trying to project things that maybe could be done, could be possible within 30 years. Of course, now we're in 2025. It explored also the future military use of weather modification because it was done by the Air Force. So you've got a lot of government things happening at once, but this article was sort of the seed that sprouted and went crazy. As many of us probably already know, we don't seem to let the truth get in the way of a good story. So you've got this article come out. Then you've got high-profile radio stations and programs across the nation that specialize in things like conspiracy theories began promoting the idea that the government was to blame for lots of little things that were going wrong. Of course, there may have been a thread of truth there. And then, of course, you have the rise of the internet, online forums, and this has just grown and grown and grown. Now, keep in mind, the general theory was that the government was trying to use chemicals for mind control, population suppression, etc. All this got tied in together with this word chemtrails, which leads us to that word chemtrail. Let me give you the definition here. A visible trail left in the sky by an aircraft and believed by some to consist of chemical or biological agents released as part of a covert operation. Okay? And you know that we're a society that likes that kind of thing. Now, we've gotten to this point in the discussion. Let me share a few thoughts with you. Have governments ever undertaken secret operations? Of course they have. In fact, over time, most governments have openly admitted mistakes they have made in the past. We know that that occurs. Has anything like mind control been tried in the past? I've read possibilities. I really have no idea. I'd have to say that there's probably that chance. But let's talk about chemtrails. The reality is, in today's extremely well-informed age, it would be more difficult than ever in history to accomplish this. Why? Well, we're so interconnected and we've got so much information at our fingertips, on top of which you'd have to have an illogical and really impossible level of complicity. Let me make a few points here. Those involved in keeping this a secret would have to include governments around the world that don't like each other, scientists that rarely agree about anything, and a global media that never gets along. Not to mention the fact that now anybody with a smartphone can become a reporter and show you actual things that are occurring anywhere in the world. And maybe more basic and now capitalistic argument against chemtrails, you'd have to convince publicly traded companies like airlines, commercial airlines, which is where we see most of these, to take part in something that would cause their own stock price to drop if anybody found out, and of course, drive them out of business. And nobody wants that. And so I think that's a huge sort of marker showing us that this is probably not the case. So far, there has been no credible proof or evidence that chemical trails or chemtrails are an actual consistent thing. On the other hand, it's really pretty easily proven that condensation trails do happen all the time. All right, so let me share a couple of final thoughts. Friends, we all know that we live in a world today where quick, easy, and catchy wins. It seems to control everything. Memes become truth simply through sheer volume. Misinformation is no longer discarded. It's laughed at, it's shared, it's celebrated, and then it becomes reality. We say something enough times and read it enough times, all of a sudden we think that's the real deal. Should we question things? Absolutely. Don't just take someone's word on it, and I mean even mine. Dig deeper. Get your information from several sources. Get it vetted. Find out who's giving you the information, and then check several other locations. And that's really my point for us all today, is to think. As always, I'm going to encourage us to think reasonably and calmly, to take the time to research things. You know, we're a very sort of microwave society right now where we want everything fast. We want our information fast. We digest it quickly and we move on. And we often share those things that we think are bombastic or dramatic. And that is not good. It's not helping us as a society. We're getting a lot of bad information. We've got to avoid just believing something because we read it and then also sharing it because it's trendy or outrageous. So let me talk about that for a minute. You can be an agent of positive change by simply not sharing something or not immediately believing what you read or see just because it has been designed to catch your eye and can be bombastic. The media knows what it's doing. Headlines are written to capture your attention that way. And let's be honest, there's a lot of stuff that deserves to not be shared out there. I think we all know that that's true. So what is important? Open, calm, honest discussions, seeking truth, and subsequently finding truth. That's going to always be critical, and that is my suggestion for you today. All right, in closing, are chemical trails possible? I'd have to assume they're possible. We know that there are chemicals in the air, and maybe in the past something has been tried, but I don't know that we've ever seen that impact on our society. But when we're looking up daily and we see those planes and those lines of clouds in the sky crisscrossing each other, and I've taken photos of them many times over the years because they can be so beautiful, changing shape as the wind blows. Are those chemical trails? I'd have to say that the evidence really overrides that. They're more likely just normal condensation or contrails. And you, my friends, are now weather wise. Remember, seek truth and share truth responsibly. I want to take a minute to thank my sponsor again, Lexus of Memphis. You guys and gals are fantastic out there. And as always, if you've got a thought, a question, a comment, or an idea for a future show, something about weather or finance you'd like to have explored, email us. We'd love to hear from you. You can send that to the Current Temp at gmail.com. That is it. We have checked that Current Temp. Now, go out and have a great week.